You're not actually our daughter. You never were. And Dad made sure you'd get nothing." Those words, said to my face, by my own brother, at our father's funeral reception, while people were still holding paper plates of food in the next room. I didn't cry. I couldn't. I just stood there, holding a lukewarm cup of coffee, feeling the floor tilt underneath me like the whole world had just decided to reorganize itself without asking me first. My name is Claire. I'm 34 years old. I grew up in a modest but loving home in Columbus, Ohio, or at least, I thought it was loving. My dad, Robert, was a quiet, hard-working man. My mom passed away when I was 9. After that, it was just the 3 of us kids, my older brother Tyler, me, and Sienna, the youngest, the one Dad always called his little miracle. I was the responsible one, the one who drove Dad to chemo appointments, the one who handled insurance calls and prescription pickups, the one who stayed. And then I found out I'd been erased from his will entirely. The reason listed? Not a biological child. Now here's the part that made my stomach drop to the floor, because in this family, I wasn't the only one who wasn't biological. We were all adopted, every single one of us. So why was I singled out? And if you were in my position right now, if your family looked you in the eyes and said you don't belong, what would you do? Keep watching. Because the DNA results that came back 3 weeks later didn't just answer that question, they blew the whole family apart. Let me take you back to the beginning, because this story doesn't make sense without context. And trust me, once you hear the full picture, you're going to feel things. You might even need to pause and take a breath. I was adopted at birth. My parents, Robert and Diane Calloway, couldn't have biological children, and they were open about that. It was never a secret, never a source of shame. Mom used to say, "We didn't give birth to you, we chose you." And as a little girl, that felt like the most beautiful thing anyone had ever said to me. Tyler came first. He was adopted 2 years before me. Big, goofy, kind-hearted Tyler, who taught me how to ride a bike and let me win at board games on purpose. Then there was Sienna, adopted when she was just 6 weeks old, 3 years after me. She was Dad's favorite from the moment he held her. We all knew it. Nobody said it out loud, but we all knew. Mom died of a brain aneurysm when I was 9. It was sudden, it was brutal, and after that our family shifted in ways I don't think any of us fully processed. Dad pulled inward. Tyler became the protector. I became the caretaker. Even at 9 years old, I was making sure lunches got packed and homework got signed. And Sienna leaned into being the baby, always crying at just the right moment, always needing just a little more. I told myself that was just her personality. I told myself I wasn't jealous. I told myself a lot of things. Fast forward to when I'm 28. Dad gets diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but the kind of thing that quietly, steadily changes everything. He starts needing help, real help. And guess who showed up? Me. I lived 40 minutes away. I rearranged my work schedule. I drove to Columbus every single weekend for 3 years. I organized his medications. I drove him to appointments. I sat in waiting rooms reading the same outdated magazines for hours, just so he wouldn't have to sit there alone. I learned to cook the soft foods he needed when swallowing became difficult. I handled calls with insurance companies that left me on hold for 45 minutes at a time. Tyler helped when he could. He had 3 kids and a demanding job, so I didn't blame him. But Sienna? Sienna lived 12 minutes from Dad. 12 minutes. She visited maybe once a month, brought flowers sometimes, sat with him for an hour, took a photo for Instagram. Yes, Instagram. Captioned, "Sunday with my favorite person," and left. I never said anything, because I wasn't doing it for the credit. I was doing it because he was my dad. But here's what I didn't know was happening underneath all of that. While I was scheduling his follow-up appointments and organizing his financial documents, Sienna was having a completely different kind of conversation with my father. I found this out later, much later, from his home health aide, a woman named Patricia, who became something like a quiet witness to everything that happened in that house. Patricia told me that Sienna had started visiting more frequently in the last 8 months of Dad's life. Not to help, but to talk. Long conversations behind closed doors, and the topic, me. Patricia said she overheard pieces of it. Things like, "Dad, don't you think it's weird that Claire is so obsessed with your finances?" And, "I just worry about her motives, you know? She was always a little different from us." Different. That word. I didn't know any of this at the time. I just kept showing up, kept doing what needed to be done, kept loving a man I thought loved me back the same way. Dad passed on a Tuesday in March. Peaceful, which I'm grateful for. I held his hand. Tyler was there. Sienna arrived 40 minutes later. She'd been at a brunch. I know because I saw her Instagram story. The will was read 2 weeks after the funeral. We met at the family attorney's office. Me, Tyler, Sienna, and a cousin named Gerald, who I'd met maybe 4 times in my life. The attorney, a dry-voiced man named Mr. Harmon, read through the document in a steady monotone. Tyler got the house. Sienna got the investment accounts. Significant ones, by the way. We're talking roughly $340,000. Gerald got a small cash sum and some personal items. And me? Mr. Harmon looked up from the document and said in that same even tone, "Claire is excluded from the estate on the grounds that she does not share biological lineage with the deceased." I actually laughed. It was a reflex, because it was so absurd. We were all adopted. None of us shared biological lineage with Dad. That was the whole point. Tyler went pale. Even Sienna looked momentarily caught off guard, but then she composed herself very quickly, and I noticed that. I filed it away. I said calmly, "Can you clarify what that means, exactly?" Mr. Harmon showed me an addendum to the will, signed 6 months before Dad died. It stated that based on information received, there was reason to believe that Claire Calloway's adoption had been arranged differently than those of Tyler and Sienna, that she may not have been legally or formally adopted through the same process, and that as a result, she was to be excluded from inheritance. Information received. From whom? That's when Tyler looked at Sienna, and Sienna looked at her nails. I drove home that day in a kind of white noise shock. I couldn't feel my hands on the steering wheel. I called my best friend Maya, and when she answered, I just said, "I need you to come over," and she could tell from my voice not to ask questions. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to fall apart. I was going to find out. I started with Patricia, the homemaid. She'd always been warm to me, and she was the one who told me about Sienna's private conversations with Dad. When I pressed her, she said she couldn't be sure of everything. But she believed Sienna had been planting doubts in Dad's mind for months, suggesting that my adoption records were unclear, suggesting I might have ulterior motives, suggesting delicately that I wasn't really family in the way the others were. She told me something else, too. She said that in his final weeks, Dad had asked her once, quietly, if she thought Claire really loved him. And Patricia had said, "Mr. Calloway, that girl drove here every weekend for 3 years. If that's not love, I don't know what is." And she said he'd nodded slowly and said, "You might be right. I think I made a mistake." He died 4 days later. Whatever he'd meant to do about it, he never got the chance. I can't describe what that felt like, to know that he knew at the end, that he'd been manipulated, that he'd seen through it, but that it was too late. That is a grief I don't have words for. So I requested a DNA test for all 3 of us. Tyler agreed immediately, no hesitation. He said, "Claire, I don't know what's going on, but I'm with you." That meant more to me than I can say. Sienna refused at first. She said it was invasive and unnecessary, and that she found it offensive that I was making this into a whole thing. Those are her words, verbatim. But here's the thing about legal disputes over estates. And yes, I'd retained an attorney by this point. Sometimes the court can compel certain kinds of evidence. My lawyer filed a challenge to the will on the grounds that the addendum was based on false information and potentially undue influence. As part of that process, DNA testing became relevant. Sienna eventually submitted. The results came back on a Thursday morning. I was sitting at my kitchen table with Maya when I opened the email. My hands were shaking. I read it twice before I said anything. Tyler. A biological match to our father. Wait, what? I had to reread that part 3 times. A biological match, meaning Robert Calloway was Tyler's biological father. Somehow, some way that nobody had ever mentioned, ever discussed, ever acknowledged. Me. No biological match. As expected. I was adopted. No surprises there. Sienna. No biological match. So we were all still technically adopted. But the addendum had targeted me specifically. Not Sienna, not Tyler, just me. And then my attorney found something else. In the records Sienna had provided to my father, through an intermediary she'd hired, an actual paid service, there were forged documents, fabricated paperwork suggesting that my adoption had been informal and possibly illegal. Documents designed to make my father believe I wasn't really his daughter in any recognized sense. Sienna had paid someone to manufacture evidence against me. Let that sink in. She didn't just whisper doubts into our dying father's ear. She went the extra mile. She fabricated documentation. While I was scheduling his doctor's appointments, she was paying someone to forge papers to cut me out of the family. And here's the plot twist I never saw coming. The reason she was so desperate to discredit me? In Dad's original will, the one before the addendum, the estate had been split equally among all 3 of us. Sienna's scheme had moved her share from 1/3 to more than half. She'd turned a dying man against his most devoted child. For money. Tyler called me the night the forgery came to light. He was crying. Tyler, who I had never in my life seen cry. He kept saying, "I didn't know, Claire. I swear to God I didn't know." And I believe him. I do. Because Tyler's first call after the DNA results was to me, not to his lawyer, not to Sienna. To me, when I confronted Sienna, and I did confront her, in a very deliberate, very calm way that I think scared her more than screaming would have, she didn't deny it. She said, "Dad always loved you more than he should have, and you knew it." I just stared at her, because that sentence made no sense. I was the one who'd been erased from the will. I was the one who'd been called not family. And somehow, in her mind, I was the favored one. That's when I understood something important about Sienna. She'd spent her whole life believing she was Dad's little miracle, his chosen one, and yet somewhere deep down, she'd always felt like I was the one he respected more. And rather than sit with that feeling, she'd decided to destroy me. It was the most painful and clarifying moment of my life. Here's where I tell you how it ended. And I want to be clear. This isn't a tidy Hollywood ending, but it's mine, and I'm proud of it. I won the estate challenge. The forged documents were submitted as evidence of undue influence and fraud. The addendum was invalidated by the court. The original will, the one that split things equally, was restored. I didn't take a single dollar more than my share. Not one. Even when my attorney said we had grounds to pursue damages, I said no. I didn't want Sienna's money. I never wanted the money. I wanted what the money represented, the acknowledgement that I was his daughter, that I belonged, that the 3 years of weekends and the chemo drives and the insurance calls and the hand-holding at the end counted. The court gave me that. As for Sienna, she's facing civil liability for the cost of the fraudulent documents and potential criminal referral for fraud. She moved out of state. Tyler doesn't speak to her. I don't know if I'll ever be able to have a relationship with her again. Honestly, I'm not sure I want one. What I do know is this. I learned that caregiving is never invisible, even when people try to make it so. I learned that grief can be weaponized by people who feel entitled to what they didn't earn. And I learned that the truth, messy, slow, expensive truth, does eventually come out. So let me ask you again. Am I in the wrong? Was I wrong to fight back? Was I wrong to demand that a dying man's real wishes be honored against the manipulation of someone who saw an opportunity and took it? I don't think so. But I've asked myself that question more nights than I can count. If there's one thing I'd tell anyone watching this, document everything. Trust your instincts when something feels off. And if someone is whispering about you behind closed doors while you're doing the actual work, pay attention to that, because silence doesn't mean innocence. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been the one who showed up, who cared, who was overlooked, drop a comment below. Tell me your story. I read every single one. And if you're new here, subscribe. Because real stories, the kind that actually happen to real people, deserve to be told.